Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, July 26, 2024. I'm John Bodhortz, the editor of Commentary, reminding you that on Sunday, November 17th, 2024, here in New York City, we will be having our 14th annual Commentary Roast. The roastee this year following such luminaries as Ben Shapiro, Barry Weiss, Dick Cheney, Joe Lieberman, Norman Podhoretz, Roger Hertog, Jonah Goldberg, Charles Krauthammer, and other dignitaries, is maybe the grandest of them all, Natan Sharansky, the greatest living Jewish hero. You may ask, how on earth are you going to roast the greatest living Jewish hero? Well, you're going to have to come to New York on November 17th to find out. Tickets, information on tables, and the like at commentary.org/roast. This is going to be a barn burner, and if you come, you will meet my colleagues today, among them executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist and director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Matt Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Matt's colleague at AEI and our media commentary columnist, Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And our senior editor, Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
So Kamala Harris made her first substantive public appearance yesterday afternoon following a 40-minute meeting in private with Benjamin Netanyahu following Netanyahu's meeting with President Joe Biden. And Abe, how would you summarize this meeting or the response or Kamala's response to this meeting?
I felt like I knew we were in trouble when she started out with the positive throat clearing part, because saying that Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorists, which she did, is, I think, not, it doesn't even get to the bar. I mean, that's just saying I'm not with the pro-Hamas mobs overtly. And she sort of got into how she had collected money to plant trees for Israel as a child, and ever since then she's been in favor of Israel's right to defend itself against terrorist enemies and so on. So it was this sort of fantasy hippie Israel of her childhood, where people, she loves Israel as a place where you plant trees for.
Can we pause there for a second? Kamala Harris is 59 years old. I am 63. I collected money for Israel. We weren't collecting money for trees. The collecting money for trees happened in the 1950s. This is a cock and bull story. The Jewish National Fund's money for forestry and helping the Jewish National Forest and the trees was a project of the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s. She didn't do it. Some speechwriter or her own cock and bull head came up with this.
Well, maybe the second gentleman had done it. Maybe
right, exactly. Okay, so spousal privilege. She gets to be what her spouse was. She wasn't sitting in no Berkeley walking around with a pushki trying to get money for trees in the Jewish.
Well, how could she when Joe Biden was bussing her across the county?
Okay,
my bar mitzvah invitations were also a certificate that a tree had been planted in your name.
Okay, but Seth, you're an Orthodox Jew. You had an Orthodox, and that was that planting a tree in somebody's name is something that people did. A 4-year-old didn't walk around collecting money to get a bar mitzvah certificate that said that Seth Mandel, that trees have been planted.
Once again, she was that girl.
She was that girl. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I just had to interrupt for some truth telling.
No, I had the same suspicion, but then she says, so I defend Israel's right I support Israel's right to defend itself always against terrorist groups, which is always this statement in the abstract.
Well, the way she put it, though, I thought was interesting. She goes, Israel has the right to defend itself, but the way Israel defends itself matters.
Which is an echo of that's what Tony Blinken had started saying way back when. And then she got into how she's not going to look away from the tragedy. And
she won't remain silent.
She won't remain
silent. I will
silent.
not remain silent. over the Hamas propaganda
that
her aides are feeding her about the casualty numbers and the state of the food availability.
Well, we need to talk about the food. So, Abe, the overarching meta message is what I like to refer to in this case, not in her case, because as the Jewish butt. And the Jewish butt, and I'm not referring to the body part, is I'm a Zionist, but I don't like what is going on at the Western Wall with prayer and women. Or I'm a Zionist, but I am very concerned about the housing problem in Israel. Or I am a Zionist, but this kind of behavior, building a balcony off your apartment across the Green Line, that is just too provocative. So it's like the phrase, I am a Zionist, in many circles and in liberal circles is used not to express Zionism, but to express conditionality about your support for the Jewish state. So Kamala Harris, being the first spouse of a Jew, has taken on his I am a Zionist.
Well,
but
did she actually use the word Zionist, though? I think that's important.
No.
She, unlike Joe Biden,
she refused. Yeah, she refused.
She will not say that she's a Zionist.
But I'm saying what she said was, I support Israel's right to defend itself. That sentence must be followed by a but. It's not like, I support Israel's right to defend itself. Now I'll take some questions. I support.
And just worth noting on the Zionist
thing. Moving on. Yes. CNN
asked her. Yes. CNN asked her directly, "Are you a Zionist?" And they didn't print her an exact quote, a direct quote of her response, because it sounds like it was gobbledygook. Like they couldn't really make heads or tails of it. So CNN just said she wouldn't say she was a Zionist. Right. And then they read her meandering answer to other Jewish leaders and people that they spoke to for the article and said, "Does this bother you?" basically. But we never got to see the meandering answer. But the answer is no, obviously.
Right. Anyway, I just thought it's an interesting thing, because this use, there is, again, as Seth said yesterday or the other day, there's no other country in the world in which you have to say, are you an Englishist? Are you a Frenchist? Are you who are you? But with the exception of like when people walk around saying Slava Ukraine a couple of years ago, this association with the nationalist identity of another country or another people is unique to Israel. Jews would not expect a president of the United States to say, I am a Zionist. That's a weird, it's not what I would expect. It's not what I'm looking for. That doesn't matter. What matters is the policy. And so what she said was, Israel has a right to defend itself. And the minute that she said that, my blood started to run cold, because I knew that what was going to follow was the negation of the principle that Israel has the right to defend itself, because it doesn't have the right to defend itself unless it defends itself in a very particular way that is pleasing and acceptable to the San Francisco liberal wing of the American political.
And also, Israel needs to stop defending itself, because she then moved on to say it's time for the ceasefire, and Netanyahu needs to get the ceasefire and prisoner exchange done, as though it's only his choice and not Hamas's choice to agree to this deal that's been in the offing now. And she also said one other thing that I thought was weird. She said, this conflict is not a binary conflict.
Oh, yeah.
It sort of is. The evil terrorists invaded Israel and rampaged and committed the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And Israel has responded in the only way it could, which is to end that terrorist organization's ability to act as a governing force in Gaza and a military threat to the Jewish people. That is kind of up or down, yes or no. And this hemming and hawing, I have to say, is pleasing all the wrong people. When you Playbook talked to Abbas Alawieh, the former staffer to Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush, who's behind the uncommitted campaign in the Democratic Michigan primary. So he's a real winner. And he thought the speech was pretty good. It conveyed more sympathy for the plight of civilians in Gaza than President Biden has done at any point, he told Playbook. And then there's the former Justice Democrat spokesperson Waleed Shahid. He says empathy for Palestinians from the vice president is a step in the right direction, but people just want a policy change to stop the supply of bombs to Israel's war. So I would say that she worried a lot of pro-Israel people and made a lot of anti-Israel people happy. And that's not a good way to start this campaign.
Well, and her lack of moral clarity, I think, is going to be difficult to sustain. And this is, I think, why we saw some stories say she's just continuing. It's a furtherance of the Biden administration's policy. She's not departing. But I thought her statement about the protests in D.C. was very telling, because she is trying to rebrand herself on domestic matters and on the border as a tough prosecutor, right? She's trying to move herself more to the center and say she's a tough prosecutor. What she didn't say in that statement was that these people should be prosecuted. That's actually something that was a gimme that she didn't take. So there is this weird way in which I think she's trying to seem more empathetic towards the Palestinian cause while not saying with great moral clarity, Hamas bad, Israel good, which is that is the binary. You're absolutely right.
We need to talk about what she said about what Israel is doing wrong or what is happening that she cannot remain silent about. And it was very telling. She used a very telling phrase to describe the supposed humanitarian. It's not supposed. There's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza because there's been a war in Gaza, and all wars lead to humanitarian crises. Homes are destroyed. Bad things happen. People are at risk. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. So I'm not saying it's not a humanitarian crisis. It's a classic thing to worry about, and the thing that the World Food Program was worried about, and everybody was talking that they were so worried about 3, 4, 5 months ago, was a famine. There was going to be a famine. There was no food. They were not getting food. Bibi Netanyahu went before the Congress on Wednesday and said that the aid that has gone to Hamas over the last 6 months, largely through Israeli passage, though some of it came on the now fabled dock pier that we built and that kept washing away, amounted to 3,000 calories per day per Gazan, which is more than a subsistence diet. Now, whether that food got into the bellies of Gazans was something that Israel could not guarantee, because it does not occupy Gaza. It is not the civil administration of Gaza. That food was getting stolen by Hamas, and the UN workers and other food aid workers who were supposed to distribute it basically are either handmaidens of Hamas or frightened by Hamas or weren't going to interpose themselves between a Hamas gun and a food truck. So that's a secondary issue. So she could not use the word famine. She could not say that Israel is causing a famine in Gaza, because it is not. So what did she say? She said, there is terrible food insecurity in Gaza. Gazans are suffering from food insecurity. Food insecurity is the new left-wing hunger advocacy, what would you call it, cliche, because in fact, there is almost no famine on the planet Earth any longer. There is more food than there are people. When people don't have access to food, it's almost always politically the result of politics, not the result of a warlord doing something or a government trying to starve out a Techi province or something like that. And so now we're at food insecurity. By the way, in America, I don't know about this, there's food insecurity in the middle of our inner cities because there aren't enough
food deserts.
There are food deserts, but there's also, in general, the food desert is a species of food insecurity. So just as somebody who is living in a poor neighborhood in Detroit is suffering from food insecurity because they don't have a Trader Joe's, so too are the Gazans experiencing food insecurity, and she can no longer remain silent about this. So let's try to parse what it means that the Democratic nominee for president of the United States is effectively accusing Israel of contributing to the food insecurity of the people of Gaza. It would strike me that the easiest thing that you could blame Hamas for if you were an opponent of Hamas, but you don't like Israel's war, is to say the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, as relates to food, is one of the many reasons why we support Israel in its effort to defeat Hamas in this war. Because the people of Gaza who are suffering from a lack of access to food are suffering that lack of access because of the behavior of a group that we consider an enemy of the United States. It's on a terrorist watch list, all of that stuff. And instead, this implicitly shifted the blame for food insecurity to Israel. That is somebody who is not a friend of Israel. She's not a friend of Israel. That is maybe not a statement of total enmity, but it is a blame shift of an extraordinarily high order. And remember, this is her first substantive statement on any issue as the presidential nominee of her party. It's been a week or nights, whatever. She went to the sorority instead of listening to the speech. She's giggled. She made a pretty good video with a song about freedom about it. And, she spoke to the workers at a campaign headquarters. This was
the teachers' unions.
Teachers' unions, I'm sorry. And this was the first serious policy statement on a matter in world crisis. And it was affirmatively bad. And I'm not just saying that as somebody who has very defined views on how this war should go and how it should end and what its purpose is and what the justice of the war is. I mean, as a statement of seriousness from a person who may be running the free world in 6 months, we have every reason, even if you are not, on board with us on every way, to have that chill go up your spine that went up my spine and Abe's spine.
Can I say one more point just about delivery? She didn't look comfortable pretending to act as president. She looked slightly nervous to me. She didn't have that.
She kept checking her notes. She kept checking her notes. Texts.
She didn't have that energetic confidence that we've been hearing about ever since Biden stepped down. She cannot help but be aware that she's in deeper waters than she's comfortable in when she has to talk about something like foreign policy and allies and alliances.
And she also, there was an intentional move to equate the two sides in the war, which is what I didn't like that either, which is there was this false equivalence that she would say the images of dead babies in Gaza, the pictures of dead babies, which is like a kind of extreme way to describe what you're blaming Israel for. Because the point of that, as you said, the point of that part of the speech was, here's what Hamas did wrong, October 7th. And here's what Israel's doing wrong. Dead babies in Gaza. Like there was just a sort of extreme emotional, pull to it. And then there was the I see you, I hear you sort of thing, which was, people who were complaining in the Arab American community that there was no empathy for Palestinians. When Biden would speak, this was, a sort of direct way to try to say, I see you, I hear you, and I recognize your humanity and all this other stuff. But it's an implicit acknowledgement from her perspective that the policy so far has lacked that empathy, and that the policy of supporting Israel in its war against Hamas necessitates not seeing the humanity of Gazans. It was a way of sort of rebuking the idea that what we've been doing so far is...
Can I just follow up on that too? Because I think it's important that Harris spoke. Biden did not. Biden met with Bibi previously, before Bibi met with Harris, and Biden just sat there for the cameras looking, half out of his mind. And then we got the actual statement of policy from Vice President Harris. John says, she might be running the country in 6 months. I think there's a good question about, is she going to run the country for the next 6 months? Like, what is her relationship to the actual administration that's already in place? Is she now the primary spokesperson for U.S. policy? What does that mean?
So that's actually a really important point to talk about also, because the stories so far have said Phil Gordon is her national security advisor, and Phil Gordon has been with her for years now, and she's not the assumption is she's not going to retain the primary national security figures, right? According to that Politico story, from the Biden administration, the Secretary of State, the national security advisor. So there is a disconnect here in that the Secretary of State and the national security advisor, who are currently, I mean, we could even throw the CIA chief in there because he's close to Biden. Biden trusts him. He probably won't be in that position in the future. These guys who are also running the negotiations for the hostages and things like that, they're actually involved right now in things she's talking about, but she has moved past the point where they have credibility because she's already signaled in a few months they're not going to be there one way or the other.
Okay, so let's move to the coverage for a second, because Peter Baker, a very good writer who is the New York Times' chief White House correspondent or analyst, or I don't know how you would describe his job, framed yesterday's statement in the most generous possible way and gives us clues as to what they actually were about. Vice President Kamala Harris offered Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu strong support, begins his piece, for Israel's right to defend itself from terrorism on Thursday, but declared that, quote, far too many innocent civilians, unquote, had died in Gaza, and that, quote, I will not be silent about their suffering, unquote. And at what amounted to her debut on the world stage, Ms. Harris sought to strike a balance and capture what she called the complexity of the strife in the Middle East. But while she did not stray from President Biden on policy, she struck a stronger note on the plight of Palestinians. What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. The images of dead children and desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety. We cannot look away in the face of these tragedies. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent. She noted that she had also met with the families of Israeli hostages held by Hamas and expressed distress for their anguish, making a point of reciting the names of each of the hostages with U.S. citizenship. I've told them each time they are not alone, and I stand with them, she said, and President Biden and I are working every day to bring them home. Now, here's what's interesting. Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and the foreign policy team of the Biden administration have talked about the devastation in Gaza and talked about how there has been too much killing and there needs to be less, and talked about how Israel shouldn't go into Rafah because it was too dangerous and was caused too much suffering, and talked about how they were going to do something because the killing of the 7 food aid workers from Jose Andres' organization was a scandal and a horror. The White House, the Biden White House, has not looked away and has not been silent. So in a weird way, he's doing her a solid by saying, in what she would want, by saying she's changed the tone. This has been the tone.
This is all part of the project, John, of pretending that Kamala Harris has nothing to do with Biden. By Monday, they'll be saying, what do you mean she's the vice president? She was never appointed the vice president. Right? What do you mean she was the point person on the board?
There is no vice president.
There is no vice president.
There's never been a vice president.
I've got, and it's worse than that. I've got an appropriate, it's worse than that.
Thank you.
Kamala was saying, I will not be silent, not just to sort of get this new image of that she's changing gears, because saying I will not be silent implies that there's a conspiracy to be quiet about Jewish misdeeds, about Israel's wrongdoing. That is a very, very common theme throughout all anti-Semitism, online anti-Semitism. But if Israel does something, you can't criticize it, right? Don't say the AIPAC, the Jewish lobby, everyone will come down on you. It's an interesting choice to say, I will not be silent. If you want to talk about dead bodies or pictures of dead bodies, talk about it. I will not be silent is a different declaration.
The situation in Gaza right now is that civilians are not dying. Civilians have not been dying in Gaza for a very long time. As Bibi Netanyahu said in his speech, he asked the commander of Rafah when he was in Rafah, how many terrorists have been killed? Commander said, as far as we know, 1,201. How many civilians have been killed? He said, I don't think any, because following American demands and Israel's wants, 1 million people were moved out of harm's way, out of the battle zone, out of the fight in Rafah. She is making reference to how far too many Gazans have been killed, and it's so terrible. Israel has addressed the problem that it faced in the early months of the war, which is that Hamas was completely interwoven into the daily domestic lives of the civilian infrastructure in Gaza, the tunnels in every building, the tunnels in the hospitals, the command center under the Sheba Medical Center. All of that meant that if Israel was going to strike where it was going to strike, there was going to be collateral damage. People have told me, active duty fighters have told me, that in their experience going into hundreds of buildings in the first 3 months of the war, that there was not a single building that was not either an arms depot or had a tunnel entrance. There was no separation between the battlefield and where civilians lived and Hamas's, basing itself and where civilians lived. And so Israel could not but do what it did where it had to do it. And then it stopped.
What's the other reason that far fewer civilians, maybe zero, are dying? Because more Israeli soldiers are dying. In other words, they changed their strategy to a point where they stopped. The U.S. said stop dropping those bombs and all that, and so they had to go in house to house fighting, which in Gaza is, the houses are atop a tunnel system that's one of the largest in the world right now. So you have like a 2-level thing, and they said when they go into tunnels, the tunnels are booby trapped. There's either a Hamas guy in there with a gun, or Hamas left and booby trapped it on the way out. So what Israel has to do now in order to reduce civilian casualties this low is send its own people into booby-trapped underground dungeons, and that's what they're doing. So that's the other reason. It's important. Israelis are trading their own lives for to save Palestinian lives.
That is a very important note for 2 reasons. One of which is that Israel conducts itself, as John Spencer and others have said, in the midst of an urban battlefield, in a manner, a humanitarian manner unknown in the history of the earth. What it does, how it does this is not something that anyone has ever cared about in the history of warfare. You're pursuing an enemy, they go into a town, you're not going to sacrifice your own people. You blow up the town. We did it in France, we did it in Germany, we did it in Japan. Everybody else does it. That's what they do. One of the reasons they do this is because they are a civilized nation in the 21st century. And the other reason is because they are trying to help the Biden administration with its political problem. He expressed gratitude to the United States and to President Biden for their support and our support for Israel. Biden basically said to him implicitly, you're making this very hard on me. The support that I'm giving you is causing me political problems. Change your warfighting strategy. Do me a solid. I did you a solid. Make this easier. Change the headlines. And they changed the headlines. But you know who they didn't change the headlines enough for, and this is the other chill going down your spine thing a little bit, is Donald J. Trump, the Republican nominee for president, who went on television yesterday and said Israel better finish up because they're just getting the hell kicked out of them in PR. The PR is terrible. So they better finish up because the PR is terrible.
Well, that's what Trump has been saying for months.
Okay, but right now it's a chance to draw a contrast. And the contrast is the Biden administration is a bunch of panty waists. Let Israel finish the job. It's doing it, it'll do it, but that's not what he said. He said they're getting the crap beat out of them. They better finish up because it doesn't look good on TV.
So I think it's interesting to bring up Trump because this is the first time in the last decade where Trump is actually not the center of attention.
This week, you mean?
This week. Yeah. Since Harris's Soviet-like consolidation of the Democratic nomination in the 48 hours after Biden's withdrawal, Donald Trump has basically been invisible. And I don't know what to do with myself because this is something that I have not experienced in essentially a decade. Right, a quarter of my life has been spent.
It's like when your children go to camp for the first time, and you're like, "Wait,
what do I do?
It's so quiet
in here." Yeah, since 2015, I have spent pretty much a third of my waking hours, and that's a low estimate, thinking about Donald Trump and what he represents and what he does and what he says. And yet this week, he's been invisible. In fact, the big story out of, and I don't want to digress, but the big story out of the Trump campaign has nothing to do with Donald Trump this week. It's all about J.D. Vance's comments a few years ago about childless women. That's the big story. So granted, yeah, Trump may have said this line about Israel, again, something he's been saying for a while, but I don't take it too seriously as an indication of policy because remember at his nomination speech just a week ago, he demanded the release of the hostages prior to his assuming office. And he said that if they were not released, then there would be hell to pay. But the larger story here is Kamala is dominating the news and Washington and earned media and politics in a way that only Donald Trump has before. And it's, to me, the real question is, how long can she maintain this? We woke up this morning to the news that Barack and Michelle Obama has endorsed her. As you said, John, the video that she released yesterday with Beyonce singing Freedom, that get prepared to listen to that. That's Beyonce's Freedom will be Katy Perry's fight song from 2016. It will be at every political rally. It will greet Kamala as she comes out to accept the nomination. That's our life. These memes on X, have you seen them? Kamala, the AI generated images of Kamala as Wonder Woman or as Superwoman, Supergirl. It's the hero coming black. It is the most amazing thing to see basically a simulacrum of a presidential candidate being created before your very eyes.
Yeah.
That has no relation to the actual reality of this person who has been the vice president. Right.
The best headline was the Kamala cult of personality needs a personality. I mean,
by the way, I think this is a very, Christine, every now and then we have this conversation about how the mainstream media are finished, right? They have their rating, 60% of the staff of the media, has been fired in the last 20 years. There are no local newspapers. News isn't serious. Nobody pays attention, all that. But man, there is life in the old girl yet, because this creation of these two narratives simultaneously. One narrative is the Kamala, my God, I've never seen anything like this. This is bigger than 08.
Bigger than
the
Obama.
Enthusiasm. I've read things about how we've never seen volunteer signups like this. Well, look at how much money.
How about the white
raised.
Women? The white women for Kamala Zoom call.
I was not invited to that. I'm very
where were you, Christine?
I was not one of the thousands.
Well, that's going to go on your social credit score because apparently this was the largest Zoom call ever. It crashed. Kamala crashed Zoom. But I have one point to make about this, because this is like the affinity group mindset runs for president. And I don't see how it's sustainable over the course of the campaign. That you have white women for Kamala. People thought it was a joke when it was trending online last night, because some of the comments that people were saying on this is like, white women have treated black women poorly for centuries, but now it's our time to do what is right. And then I woke up this morning.
Reparations. It's literally gender-based reparations.
I woke up this morning to the playbook, the Politico playbook, and its account of how Doug got the news. This is Politico playbook. Biden's decision to withdraw from the presidential race last Sunday caught much of the nation off guard, including Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, who told attendees on a Black, Gay, and Queer Men for Harris call last night that he had just finished a SoulCycle class with a gay couple friend of his in West Hollywood and was enjoying coffee in a park when the news dropped. My friend's partner said, "You need to look at this," Emhoff said. "I just went to the end because I'm a lawyer, so I always go to the end." He said, "No, look at the line above that." Editorial comment. What was the final line? I don't understand. Doug continues, "I didn't have my phone, so I ran and got into our car. And of course, my phone is just on fire. And it's basically, call Kamala, call Kamala, call Kamala." So
it's like an elite Mad Libs.
You will have these Democratic conventions segregated
there's no way he had a
by
conversation
race.
with somebody about that and then said, "Don't tell me what happened. I'm going to run to my car and check my phone."
I just want to say that this is exactly the mistake the Hillary Clinton campaign made in 2016. That the Clinton campaign's convention was all about, here's the white women, and we're yes all women, and here's our gay community, and we're going to protect who you love whenever you want to love, and then here's Black Lives Matter, and here's the Hispanics for Clinton. And you know what they didn't do? They didn't present a message to the rest of the country, which is still 65% of the population, and is not interested in identity politics.
But her first ad is going all in. Matt's right. It begins with pride flags being waved, and then it's mainly women. It's mainly focused on abortion type visuals, which is just like a kindly looking doctor, of course, not an actual visual.
No, there's one elderly white couple.
Right, and then one white dude in an audience
smiling and holding hands.
And there's sort of vaguely
this is what they were waiting for.
They're supposed to be the Bidens. They're going to be let off the stage.
Well, you know who she's missing, and actually our friend Rui Tejera has a good column about this, that she's not talking to working class voters. And this is the long-term problem of the Democratic Party, is that it's elite and highly educated.
Neither did Hillary.
And neither did Hillary. And they're going to repeat that same mistake.
For a second? I want to be briefly Tom Friedman for a second. When after the 2016 election, I went to get, my haircut where I normally do, where I normally did in New York. And they knew that I worked for the New York Post. And as soon as the election was over, people started being honest about, how they felt about Trump. And the barber shop is like 4 immigrants from all different places, one Spain, one Lebanon, said like that. They were all huge Trump fans. And the Lebanese guy had a MAGA yarmulke at his station that was given to him by somebody. And so I asked them about it, and they said, look, here's what happened. We have people back home we send money to. And so the economy is what matters. And the things that Trump said that upset people, we can't really afford to pay attention to them. But the day before the election, where was Trump? In Michigan, with with people, with a community that had been hard by the opioid crisis or something like that, or a factory town that had closed. Where was Hillary? And this is what they said: having a concert with Beyonce in Washington. Hillary did have a Beyonce show, or Beyonce, Katy Perry, whatever. And they brought that up as like, see, we were right. And so that's my sort of Thomas Friedman thing, which is like, we didn't voters these were Hispanic and immigrant voters who really didn't like seeing the focus on the stars and the celebrities and all that stuff. They noticed it and they considered this to be so. Obviously they were not the only ones that felt that way, because we know who won the election. But when we say here that this reminds us of Hillary Clinton, it is a carbon copy of what went wrong with Hillary.
Right. But it's all happening, at 150% time. You know how you can listen to this podcast at 2 times speed. So she's got 100 days to get herself to the presidency. And that is what the media are joining in a way, I would say, like,
and it could work. It could work.
It could absolutely work. And I think this was Abe's point last week, that every effort was going to be made, again, implicit, but across all media, to smooth her path and to make this as glide as maglev as possible while she goes. And so this is the best video that anyone has ever made. More signups, that she raised so much money. It's crazy.
She's never met Joe Biden. What are you saying? She's never met Joe Biden. But she has nothing to do with him or his administration.
But I think what's also interesting is this enforced amnesia. So I'm not just talking about the Soviet retconning of her point person on the border being converted into the term border czar, and she was never border czar. I mean, this erasure of the organization's webpage that found that she was the most liberal senator in 2019 and all of that. So we're basically watching in real time as Stalin is erasing
the Kamala vanishes. Yes.
Yeah, with the Politburo. That's one thing. The other thing, though, is about the money and the fundraising and the enthusiasm and all that. I'm not in any way denying that the Democratic Party has been liberated from an anchor that, as Abe said, was only going to drag them down and down and down if Biden had remained the nominee. But Trump raised more money than Kamala did in the days after the conviction from Alvin Bragg than she raised. I believe that number was in excess of $150 million. She raised about $100 million in 24, 48 hours. It's incredible. It's great. Honestly, I'm not gainsaying the fact that Democrats were released with enthusiasm and excitement and everything that I'm hearing, and the people that are excited. And that's important, because excitement is an X factor in presidential bids and campaigns. And if she can maintain it, it will be very important. But here are the things. Yes, she's closing the gap in the polls. We are now back to the race that we had for most of 2023 and 2024. It's a 1.2 point race, and it'll probably bounce between them. In one poll she's up 2, and 4 or 5 other polls he's up 1 or 2. That's where we were. And so it was a jump ball. We had no idea who was going to win this presidency. It became pretty clear in the weeks before Biden dropped out that, all things being equal, Trump was going to win, that Biden had no way to climb out of the hole that he was falling into. And that is no longer the case, and everybody needs to acknowledge this fact. But there is a point at which the retconning and the propaganda are going to get laid on we're already at that point because we don't like her. It's getting laid on pretty thick. That's where the second thing I want to talk about is, which is the story of J.D. Vance and his comments about childlessness and other things about J.D. Vance. So J.D. Vance is being taken, and Democrats and liberals are fantastic at this. He is becoming a tar baby. And it's almost instantaneous. And he would be an unlikely person to be this figure, because he's not Dan Quayle, right? Yale Law School graduate, author of a hugely best-selling book, successful, married to a highly accomplished person from an immigrant family of a different ethnic pedigree. smart, perfectly attractive, has a nice young family, all of that. He is now becoming somebody who had sex with a couch and hates
Cat ladies.
women and hates poor either women who have made the deliberate choice not to have children because that's their right, or people who can't have children and all of that. And I think he was a mistake. I think the choice was a mistake. I thought it was a mistake when Trump made it. I think it's a mistake now because proper oppo, as I think I said the other day, would have uncovered the Tucker interview, and somebody smart would have said, you know what, this is pretty exploitable. He said that, the Democratic Party is run by crazy, childless, cat ladies. That's not good because, we do need women who don't have children to vote for us. Or people who've never been married can also vote for us. We need to appeal to everybody. Nonetheless, whoever this JD Vance is that is now being constructed before our eyes has no relation to the JD Vance who actually exists. And that is pretty interesting because, as I say, there is life in the mainstream media yet. This ability to construct these towers instantaneously. It's like the Tower of Babel is being built right in front of our eyes on Kamala's behalf, and a kind of memorial to J.D. Vance's reputation.
But in some ways, they're different, though, right? Because what's happening to Vance is based on a speech he delivered and a television clip that he gave. Whereas with Kamala, it's actually the erasure of everything she has ever done or said for their entire adult life. And so they're downplaying her connection to the administration that she has served in for the last 3.5 years. They're trying to avoid having to deal with the legacy of her 2020 presidential campaign, where she staked out far left ground. And to hear, I don't know why, I subjected myself to some clip of Pete Buttigieg yesterday trying to explain in that condescending McKinsey consultant
you mean
tone
that
drives me up a wall. He's saying, well, there were several lanes in the 2020 Democratic primary, and Kamala was not in the left lane. Oh, really? So that's why she supported Medicare for all and said several times it was time to abolish private health insurance.
She wasn't in any lane.
That she was, yeah, right, because she dropped out before the first caucus.
Pete Buttigieg got votes from people in New Hampshire, but that's what they're going to say next, that she didn't run for president in 2020.
My point is, it's more, what was happening to J.D. Vance is more traditional in the sense that people went through the research. They found something that was always going to be a problem. I wrote about it at the time in 2021, saying this is a problem, and if you're going to nominate him for Senate in 2022, you might want to reckon with that. Whereas with Kamala, it is weird. It is 1984 type thing that I've never really quite seen before. Because as I point out in my column on the Free Beacon today, with Obama, Barack Obama, he didn't come out of nowhere. He gave that speech in 2004 at the DNC. It was clearly the speech of the convention. He became a political star that night. He gave that speech. 2 years later, after he was in the Senate, he published The Audacity of Hope, massive bestseller. I remember I was in Austin for a book fair, turning a corner and seeing lines around the block and asking my handler there, well, whose book is that? And I said, oh, that's Obama. That's in the fall of 2006, right? When he filled an NFL stadium for his acceptance speech in 2008 in Denver, Colorado, had Stevie Wonder playing, the Greek columns. That Obama was something else, right? And Harris has coconut tree memes. This is going to push her over the edge.
By the way, can we talk about the coconut tree meme? Because people are like, I don't know where this came from. I don't understand. Apparently, she said something about how her mother said,
you didn't just fall from the coconut tree. Right. Yeah.
Coconut is also a slur, actually.
That's not where my mind went. And I think where a lot of people who have been parents in the last 20 years went. And where sometimes these things can have a backlash later. So it's the coconut tree. It's a children's book. There's a children's book called Chicka Chicka Boom Boom.
That's right.
It's an ABC book.
Flashbacks.
A
Yes.
told B and B told C, I'll meet you at the top of the coconut tree. We said D to E, F, G, I'll meet you at the top of the coconut tree. Chicka, chicka, boom, boom. Will there be enough room? I'm handing this to the Trump campaign. Have Trump read Chicka, chicka, boom, boom at a rally and say, this is the world of Kamala Harris. It is a book teaching children their ABCs, and she is a ridiculous figure. So maybe her mother said, do you think I fell out of a coconut tree? Maybe that's where the author of Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, that cliche, got to her mother and the coconut tree. But I don't even know if that story is true. I don't believe a single thing that comes out of. Can I just say,
the way, John,
I do not believe a single thing that comes out of her mouth. I wish I did, because I wish I believed that her life was as cliche riddled and sort of liberal fantastical as the what is he saying freedom. She is as much of a fabulous as Trump is, as far as I can tell,
And Biden.
and I think maybe that's one of the things you need to be a presidential candidate. But I think that it's 100 days and they're playing blocking tackle and they're building the field and they're building the columns for her to speak in front of at the DNC in Chicago and all of that. 100 days is still a long time. Just think about the last 26 days. And I don't think, maybe you can jump in here, because I don't think she's going to get away with it. Maybe it's come on too strong, too fast, too hard, and therefore the counter reaction will be bad. But I think you think she is going to get away with it.
I think it's possible. My fear is that clearly silly things sometimes succeed really well. Nakedly obnoxious, transparently manufactured things sometimes work beautifully on everyone that they're supposed to work on. And even though Matt is entirely correct that this is not like Obama, because Obama knew in his marrow how to create his own cult of personality and had worked on it for years. He didn't need anyone to manufacture it for him.
And he had an issue, right? He had the war. Yeah. That was the whole thing. He was the one who was against
the war, and then he had the financial meltdown.
But by the time he got there, the cult around him and the puffery of his image and the praise was already sickening and ridiculous to me, and it worked like a charm throughout. And in that sense, yeah. I fear this could work.
No, it could work. I thought it was interesting in his call, in the ad that they released today, where Michelle and Barack Obama call Kamala Harris to endorse her. He says, we're the underdogs in this election, which I thought was funny because, it took him a week to endorse her. And even in the call, he said, we're starting off kind of behind, but we're going to do everything we can. I wonder about his own doubts about Harris, and they're going to be subtle, and of course he's going to put on a good smiling face in order to have the Democrats win, but it must irk him too. I mean, he was the big star in the Democratic Party for so long, and now out of nowhere, instantaneously, 24 hours, she goes from being a political liability on the ticket to
she's better than Obama.
I don't even know she's better than Obama. She's Beyonce and Taylor Swift all rolled up into one.
There was no Obama. Who's Obama? This is the first black president we have a chance to elect. And that's why everybody is so emotional over the progress that we're making. There's no Obama. I covered Obama's rally in New Jersey when he was on. That was the first time that I realized the magnitude of the movement, because he was still slightly behind, but it was right before Super Tuesday. And he did so well on Super Tuesday that it kind of pushed him into, people said, all right, he may actually win. He may actually
made it a race and went on to June.
Yeah. And that New Jersey rally was, first of all, it was like Robert De Niro, Ted Kennedy, it was already like Hollywood stars plus, the lion of the Senate, and stuff like that. But on the floor near the stage, I saw people crying. That was my first experience with that kind of politics, that
No.
kind of almost like religious festival type politics. But the tears were genuine. This was
my tears are genuine too, Seth.
But people were
Kamala Harris
like
has
they
been
weren't
making
like
me cry for the past
MSNBC.
48 hours.
It wasn't
But-
Nicole Wallace, although Nicole Wallace
don't-
was on the other side, so she was probably crying at the same time. But it was like people felt like there were people who had reason to feel like something special was going on here. And I want to say, after the RNC, Van Jones on CNN said, the last time I saw a convention like that was Obama's in 2008, meaning there was, after Trump got shot and there was, and he had the convention, it was a pretty incredibly well-done convention, right? And all the ads being, and all the nostalgia, but there was also this kind of like feeling in the air because he had just been shot and was still standing in front of them. And Van Jones had said, the sort of the atmosphere that you can't really measure, but it's there. I last saw that in 2008 with Obama. There was some kind of thing.
But
and they basically just tried to transfer that to Kamala, right? Like just give the atmosphere, but you can't manufacture.
But here's the thing. I think now I'm sort of rethinking her chances of getting away with it. Obama had in himself an undeniable kind of magic. Trump had a very different kind of magic. She doesn't. Kamala doesn't. She can't sell what they're creating for her. Does that matter? I'm not sure, but it's going to show here and there, certainly.
Well, of course she doesn't. I mean, 6 weeks ago, the idea was Biden can't drop out of the race because Harris will be the nominee and she'll do worse. And the polling showed she'd do worse. Now, all of that can change. The conventional wisdom is often wrong, and it could be wrong about her. And this is just the kick that Democrats needed, and they will use her the way all good politicians are used, in the sense that they can function as Rorschach tests and be whoever you want them to be when you need them to be. And every Republican who wants Trump to win, and every conservative who fears Harris, and every Zionist who sees Harris as a unique threat to Israel's future needs to reckon with the fact, we all need to reckon with the fact that she really could win. And the Trump people are rattled. You can't deny that they're rattled. What on earth was going on yesterday with this totally out of nowhere statement that they're going to wait and see who they're going to debate, or they're not going to debate until she's the nominee, or they're suspending the debate discussions until that's all done.
Well, she does have to. I'm on the team that I'm not defending Trump by any means, but he agreed to debate Joe Biden. Joe Biden is no longer the candidate, so it's time for the Harris campaign to negotiate with the Trump campaign about a debate. That's
okay,
totally
but there
fair.
are two ways of doing that. But why the Biden and liberal teams are saying Trump is scared of Kamala. He's chickened out of the debate. There's a debate scheduled for September 7th or whatever date it is.
10th,
and he's chickening out. And I'm sorry, he handed that to them.
There was a scheduled debate with Joe Biden on September 10th. There's a new candidate. Organize another debate. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking that.
Yeah, I am telling you right now, this was an unforced error, because they're going to walk around going, no, now Trump's scared. Yeah, he has to debate somebody who isn't a vegetable, and suddenly he's too chicken to debate. Remember, he wouldn't debate any of the Republicans either. He's 78. Maybe he's lost a step. He's old, and, maybe it's hard for him to stand for an hour and a half. You may look at that and say, well, it's not going to matter. But these talking points, these bits and pieces of talking points that allow for a kind of constant aggression on the part of your enemies, if you're Trump, like, he did not need to issue that statement. There was absolutely no reason for him to issue the statement that he did yesterday. And I think whether or not substantively he needs to renegotiate the terms of the debate that he's having with Harris, yes or no, that's fine. You could also write that letter privately. Doesn't have to put it out on Truth Social. Like, this was this
I want to introduce you to
okay.
this man named Donald J. Trump, John, who,
Yes.
he has a tendency not to do things the way that you and I might expect a political candidate to do them. And
Matt, I thought he
it's
would,
been working out for him.
I thought he would
Substantively,
grow
he's
into the
correct.
position. I thought he would grow into the job by now.
You're saying that he's substantively correct. Don't hand me substance. He should be saying, I'll debate her tomorrow. I'll debate her Tuesday. I'll have a debate with her every single day until November. That's what he should say, or that's true.
It's what he was saying to Biden. Yeah. Fine.
Yeah.
I do think it is weird for the Harris people to say, well, we have the debate scheduled on September 10th. I'm sorry, you don't. That debate was scheduled with Joe Biden. Come up with another schedule.
Okay. I agree. I agree with you, but this was an effort by Trump to do something in the news cycle.
I guess so. My only slight disagreement is I think in the long run, the JD Vance thing is a bigger problem than the debate. I'm sure Trump will debate Kamala Harris, but
can we talk about the JD Vance thing?
Right.
Because Harry Enton, who has not exactly been a cheerleading poll analyst for the Democrats this year, our friend at CNN, my friend, been on the podcast, basically says, from what we can see now, JD Vance is entering this election season as the least popular person on a major ticket ever. And he's at like 30% approval or something like that. And I don't know how he gets it, but he's going on Megyn Kelly's podcast today to try to make the case for what it was that he was saying. I think, as I said yesterday, the thing that so rankles me about this is that he was playing with a very significant and highly complicated sociological issue about the future of the United States. And he did so, or allowed himself to do so, in an extraordinarily vulgar way that he can't take. I don't know how he takes back, and that is sticking to him like a barnacle.
Well, I do think we should point out that the way in which he addressed this issue is completely typical for the discourse on the new right, which JD Vance joined in 2019, around that time, and into 2020. And he adopted a lot of their rhetoric and a lot their style of rhetoric, which is harsh. And that was his Twitter personality. And that was kind of the rhetoric he used when he was appearing on Tucker Carlson. And so it's not a shock to anyone who's familiar with that culture that this is the manner in which he would describe the I don't know what the issue. I mean, he would describe Kamala Harris. Yeah, he would describe Kamala Harris, and he would say that the Democratic Party is controlled by childless people, which is not actually factually accurate, but nonetheless,
it's also not true of Kamala Harris, unless you want to now announce that women with stepchildren don't have children.
That's the thing about
my father had 2 stepchildren. They were his children.
They were his children.
I just wanted my father has 2, raised 2 stepchildren. And so that, again, let's add that to the brief of particulars in why what Vance said was so politically catastrophic.
But they're going to find other things that he said in this period where he was playing to the new right. He was playing to certain currents in Catholic politics, which are out of the mainstream of American life, out of the mainstream of American Catholic life, and they're going to blow it up. And so what does this tell us? One, it tells us it was a confidence pick. Trump picked him thinking that Trump was going to win and that this was a way to ensure an America First identity for the party for some time to come. It's a pick that was meant to actually boost Trump's turnout among white working class voters. That's what they thought, even though Vance's political appeal was still very sketchy. He had only won one election. And then he ran behind a lot of other Republicans in Ohio, and it cost a lot of money to get him to the Senate, like tens of millions of dollars of outside money to get him out into the Senate. And the third thing is, I think it's unusual for Trump to be in a position, again, where it's his vice presidential pick who's taking up the headlines. I mean, one thing you would say about Mike Pence is the guy is a polished communicator. And when he came out, he knew his job was to defend Donald Trump and to make the case against the opposition, and which he did for 4 years until, as Trump might say, he didn't have the courage to overturn the election, right? Where has Vance been? You're saying that Vance is going on Megyn Kelly's show today, Friday, July 26th, and that's true. Where has he been for the last 5 days? I don't understand. I think he was doing some fundraising events, but you have to introduce yourself to the country. If you don't identify yourself, if you don't project yourself, not just on podcasts that conservatives like, that are popular, like Megyn Kelly's, but also major broadcast media, your enemies will define you. And that's exactly what's happening now. And it's happening earlier than with another vice presidential candidate I have some familiarity with, Sarah Palin. Because with Sarah Palin, that pick excited the party.
And because she gave a great convention speech.
She gave one of the best convention speeches
great, and her
ever.
introduction and her
she was able to. She excited people. She excited pro-lifers. She was a rogue like John McCain. And it wasn't until really the financial crisis a month later that things began to spiral out of control, and Tina Fey began the devastating imitation of her on Saturday Night Live, which really kind of painted the Sarah Palin that still exists in the public memory. So
most people think Sarah Palin said, "I can see Russia from my house."
Right. So Vance, he had a convention speech that was kind of meh, in all honesty, and then he disappears. So we have to expect now that he is allowing himself to be defined in a very negative way. And it's quite frankly, it's a little bit of a surprise to me, because I would think that he would be a little bit more kind of strategic about this, about how he presents himself.
I assume he is completely in the hands of the Trump people. They are deciding what he does, where he does, and when he does it, and that they are off balance and off kilter. I was thinking about how I'm now going to make a demented reference, and then we can go to Matt's recommendation. When I was a kid, I loved the show I Dream of Jeannie, and I have a memory of a specific episode of I Dream of Jeannie because, as somebody who has really bad eyesight, I've spent a lot of time trying to read eye charts. And there's a scene in which Larry Hagman, as the astronaut, has to read an eye chart and in order to go on a space shot, and his eyes are bothering him and he can't read it. So he goes up to the eye chart to memorize the eye chart when the doctor leaves the office, and he memorizes the eye chart. And then the doctor comes in and says, "You ready to go?" And he says, "Yes." And then the doctor says, "Okay, well, let me get a different eye chart." And then he takes the eye chart, puts a new eye chart in. And only the magical intercession of his secret genie fixes his eyes, overfixes them actually, so that he can read the eye chart. The Trump campaign was designed to target one single person, infirm Joe Biden. And then at the last minute, they switched the eye chart on Trump. And now he has to run against Kamala. And we thought, okay, fine. Shift that. They're ready for her. We're all ready for her. San Francisco liberal, all of her records, all of the stuff on the border, blah, blah, blah. And it looks to me like they have a bit of a panic, like Larry Hagman, when the doctor switches the eye chart. Like, they should be able to have turned on a dime to go after Kamala. And the fact that JD has been silent for 5 days, and the fact that Trump doesn't know what to do and is issuing statements about how maybe I won't debate you. What do you think of that? Maybe I'm not going to debate you. I don't have to debate you, is a sign of something that we haven't seen in him or in them, which is an unsteadiness or an uncertainty about how to proceed. Now, that's fine. It's a new political situation. It's an unprecedented time. But Trump is supposed to be the person who projects absolute confidence at all times about everything he does in every possible way. And this is the first, you said it's been years since he wasn't at the center of the debate. This is the first time, really, I think, since late 2022 after his picks for Senate and stuff went, sideways, and Republicans seemed finally to have gotten mad at him for screwing up the midterm elections, that he seems off kilter. And I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if he can regain his footing, but letting Vance twist in the wind is their doing, not Vance's doing, I presume, because he's just there now. He's their vessel. So what do they need him for? He'll go and do it. What they need him for right now is not to be who he is. And I don't know how they do that. Matt, you got a recommends for us?
I do, John. Today I'd like to recommend a new book that came across my desk this week, and I'm enjoying very much, almost done with. It's a book called Glory Days by Simon Rich. Simon Rich is the humor writer. He's written for The Simpsons. He's done SNL. He had done 2 shows of his own, but really I've came to know him through his work in the New Yorker magazine. And like many of his previous books, Glory Days is a collection mainly of previously published pieces, but it contains some gems, including one piece called Participation Trophy, which is the life story of a young man told from the participation trophy that he received in a soccer tournament when he's 7 years old. A fantastic narration by a millennial who's now a great-grandfather in the future, where humanity has left planet Earth, and he has to explain to his great-grandchildren what life for millennials was like at the turn of the 21st century. There's also a hilarious first-person narrative from Mario, the video game character, as he ages and hits 40 and all the problems in his life, and some very funny details about Mario's brother Luigi as well. Simon Rich is that rare New Yorker writer who is actually funny. And I've enjoyed all of his collections, and I'm enjoying this one very much too. So Glory Days by Simon Rich, just out this week.
Simon Rich is the funniest writer in America, I think, without most, by the way, prose writer in America. Right. And I think that is not particularly a controversial opinion among my wife works in comedy, and he's a young man. He's, I don't know, early 40s or something like that. He is a revered person in the world of comedy, and it should not be a mark against him, though it may need to be said that he is the son of Frank Rich, because he has been doing this on his own for 20 some odd years and knocking it out of the park. He wrote a hilarious novel called Elliot Allagash. His TV series.
Well, his great sense of humor makes it clear that he's not riding on his father's coattail.
Frank Rich was, by the way, the single best theater critic outside of our own Terry Teachout of the 20th century. So, whatever we think of his politics, he does have a distinguished provenance. But Simon Rich is something very, very, very special. And there's that collection. There's a collection called Ant Farm.
Yeah, Ant Farm is probably my favorite.
Yeah.
But anyway, this Glory Days is a close second. I mean, it's very strong. So.
Yeah, so that is a fantastic recommendation. A good way to go into the weekend, to enjoy your weekend, would be to bring Glory Days with you to the beach or wherever you're going to enjoy a relaxing couple of days. Fortunately, I think we're not going to have much news over this weekend, so it's not like, but we can maybe relax a little bit, which we haven't been able to for a long time.
You just jinxed it.
I did jinx it. So yeah, we'll probably have an emergency podcast tomorrow and Sunday, but assuming my jinx doesn't take, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Monday. So for Abe, Seth, Christine, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.